The announcement of a highly anticipated live interview between Melania Trump and a popular liberal TV host created a buzz that quickly spread across media platforms. Known for her poised and private demeanor, Melania rarely participated in interviews, especially ones with hosts who openly criticized her and the Trump family. This upcoming live segment promised fireworks, and audiences were divided, some rooting for the host to expose perceived flaws in the former First Lady, while others anticipated a dignified response from Melania that would remind the world why she had earned respect in her own right. The liberal host, Cameron Hayes, had built a reputation for conducting hard-hitting interviews that left public figures squirming. Bold, unapologetic, and sometimes controversial, Cameron's goal was to challenge narratives and confront what they viewed as hypocrisy or privilege. Melania, however, had proven herself to be a different kind of public figure, reserved, thoughtful, and famously selective about her public appearances. The stark contrast in personalities only heightened the intrigue surrounding the interview. As the day of the broadcast approached, television promos heightened the tension. Clips of Cameron previewing the show were released, featuring lines like, "It's time to ask the tough questions," and "America deserves real answers." Pundits speculated about what angles Cameron might take. Would they focus on Melania's Be Best initiative, which had faced both praise and criticism? Would they question her marriage to Donald Trump or delve into her immigrant background? Speculation ran rampant, but one thing was certain. The host was preparing to pull no punches. On the other side, Melania Trump was preparing in her own way. In her suite, away from the clamor of the media frenzy, she reviewed the expected talking points with her small team. Advisors suggested strategies to handle potential attacks and prepared her for a wide range of questions, from her time as First Lady to her personal life. But as she listened to the advice, Melania maintained a calm expression. "I understand what they want," she said in her signature accent, her voice soft but firm. "But I will answer in my way. I do not need to fight. Truth is stronger than shouting." Her team exchanged glances, both reassured and curious. They had seen this quiet confidence before. Melania had always approached the spotlight differently. She wasn't interested in winning debates or engaging in public battles. She let her actions and words speak for themselves. Meanwhile, the media's build-up to the interview reached a fever pitch. Social media platforms were awash with opinions. Critics accused Melania of avoiding accountability, while supporters defended her grace and resilience. Hashtags like #MelaniaSpeaks and #ToughQuestionsTonight began trending, as debates raged about what might unfold during the live broadcast. As the studio prepared for the interview, the atmosphere was electric. The production crew worked feverishly, testing cameras and lighting, ensuring every detail was perfect. Cameron Hayes was in their element, pacing back and forth while rehearsing key points and transitions. Known for their sharp wit and ability to steer interviews, Cameron was confident that the evening would deliver high ratings and a memorable showdown. Finally, the time arrived. The camera panned to the host, seated confidently at the center of the studio. The set was sleek and modern, with bright lights and a bold banner that read, "Melania Trump, The Untold Story." Cameron's introduction was sharp and filled with subtle jabs. Tonight, we are joined by Melania Trump, a woman who has remained a mystery to many Americans. As the wife of one of the most polarizing figures in modern history, she's no stranger to controversy. But tonight, we're going to get answers to the questions everyone has been asking. The audience, both in the studio and at home, was on edge as the camera shifted to Melania, sitting across from the host. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress, her hair perfectly styled, and her expression calm and composed. "Thank you for joining us, Melania," Cameron began, their tone polite but loaded with an undertone of skepticism. "Thank you for inviting me," Melania replied, her voice steady and measured. From the first exchange, it was clear that the host intended to push boundaries. The initial questions were standard fare, focusing on her life as First Lady and her Be Best initiative. Melania answered thoughtfully, explaining her goals of promoting kindness, online safety, and emotional well-being for children. But as the interview progressed, the questions became sharper. Cameron began inserting pointed remarks, implying that the initiative was hypocritical given the behavior of her husband during his presidency. How do you reconcile promoting kindness and online safety when some of the most divisive rhetoric came from your own household? Cameron asked, leaning forward with a challenging expression. Melania paused for a moment, her hands resting lightly on her lap. I believe that kindness is something we all must choose, regardless of what others say or do, she replied. My focus has always been on helping children, not on the words of adults. The audience murmured, sensing the subtle strength in her response. Cameron, however, was undeterred and pressed on, shifting to more personal questions. They brought up criticism she had faced for her fashion choices, her public silence during controversial moments, and even her decision to remain in New York at the beginning of her husband's presidency. Melania handled each question with grace, never raising her voice or showing frustration. Instead, she turned the focus back to her own experiences and values. She spoke about the challenges of being in the public eye, the importance of staying true to oneself, and her belief in resilience. But the tension in the room was palpable. Cameron's tone grew more aggressive, their frustration evident as they failed to rattle her. For the host, this was no longer just an interview. It was a battle of wills, and Melania's quiet confidence was proving to be an unexpected challenge. As the segment drew to a close, it was clear that this interview was shaping up to be one for the books. The audience, both in the studio and online, was captivated by the unfolding dynamic. Cameron had underestimated their guest, and Melania's ability to deflect hostility with poise was winning over even some of her critics. The stage was set for the showdown to come, and as the final moments of Part 1 concluded, viewers were left on the edge of their seats, eager to see how the story would unfold. As the first segment of the interview concluded, the audience could sense the brewing intensity. Melania Trump's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Cameron Hayes' increasingly assertive tone. The show cut to a commercial break, but in the studio, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Cameramen adjusted their angles while the producers whispered to each other, analyzing how the first part had played out. Cameron sat stiffly in their chair, tapping a pen against the desk, visibly unsatisfied with how little progress had been made in throwing Melania off balance. Behind the scenes, Melania took a sip of water and adjusted her microphone with the help of a technician. Her expression remained unreadable. No sign of frustration, no trace of nervousness. If anything, she seemed entirely composed, as though she had anticipated every question thrown at her. Her publicist leaned in, whispering words of encouragement, but Melania simply nodded. She wasn't one for long pep talks. Her confidence came from within, cultivated over years of navigating the public eye and the storm of criticism that came with it. When the show resumed, the camera panned to Cameron, who opened the next segment with a more aggressive tone. Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Melania Trump, former First Lady and one of the most talked about figures in modern politics. Now, Melania, let's dive into some of the more controversial moments during your time in the White House. The questions began innocently enough, but they quickly escalated. Cameron touched on Melania's infamous, "I really don't care. Do you?" jacket, a fashion choice that had sparked widespread outrage during a visit to a detention center housing immigrant children. Looking back, Cameron said, leaning forward, "Do you regret wearing the jacket?" Many saw it as insensitive, given the circumstances. Melania's gaze didn't waver. She took a moment before responding, her tone calm and deliberate. The jacket was a mistake in timing, but it was not meant to be about the children. It was about people who always judge without understanding the full story. I have explained this before, and I will say again, I care deeply about children and families. That is why I went to the center, to see the conditions and bring attention to them. Cameron pressed further. But don't you think that, as First Lady, every decision you made, especially one as visible as your wardrobe, carried weight? Some would say it showed a lack of awareness. Melania's expression softened, but there was an unmistakable steeliness in her eyes. Yes, every decision carries weight, she said. But I am human just like everyone else. I do not always make the perfect choice. What matters is the intention behind the actions, and my intention has always been to help." The studio audience murmured. Cameron's attempt to paint her as careless hadn't landed as intended. Instead, Melania's acknowledgement of imperfection made her seem more relatable to some. Sensing that the topic wasn't yielding the desired effect, Cameron pivoted. This time, they ventured into the topic of Melania's marriage, a move that many anticipated but still felt invasive. "Your husband, former President Donald Trump, is known for his controversial statements and actions," Cameron began. "There were moments during his presidency when it seemed like you disagreed with him, either in your body language or your independent initiatives. How did you handle those differences privately? And more importantly, why did you stay silent publicly?" A flicker of something passed across Melania's face. Not anger, but perhaps weariness. She had heard this question many times before, and yet she treated it with the same measured respect she afforded all inquiries. "Marriage is private," she replied. "It is not for the world to judge or understand. I have my own voice, and I use it in ways I feel are meaningful. People like to assume they know what happens behind closed doors, but they do not. I focus on what I can do to make a positive impact, not on explaining myself to everyone." Cameron wasn't ready to let the topic go. "But as First Lady, don't you think you had a responsibility to publicly stand against certain things your husband said or did, especially when they contradicted your Be Best initiative?" Melania's lips tightened briefly before she answered. "The role of First Lady is not about opposing the president. It is about supporting the people of this country. My initiative was focused on children, on kindness, on creating safer spaces online. I stayed true to my mission, even when others tried to distract from it." Her response was firm yet graceful, and it was becoming increasingly clear that Cameron was struggling to pin her down. The host shifted gears once again, this time targeting Melania's roots as an immigrant. "You immigrated to this country and built a life here," Cameron said. "Yet, your husband's administration implemented some of the strictest immigration policies in modern history. Did you ever feel conflicted about that?" Melania's posture straightened slightly. This was a topic she had anticipated, and she met it head-on. "Immigration is a complex issue," she said. "I know the struggles of coming to a new country, of learning a new language, of building a new life. I also know the importance of following laws and respecting the systems in place. My story is not everyone's story, and I respect that. But I have always believed in hard work, in contributing to society, and in respecting the country that gives you opportunity." Her response struck a chord with many viewers. While critics might argue that her answer was evasive, others saw it as a reflection of her lived experience, a nuanced perspective that acknowledged both sides of the issue. As the segment wore on, Cameron grew visibly frustrated. They had hoped to push Melania into a defensive position, but she remained steady, deflecting hostility with a quiet strength that was both disarming and infuriating. The host decided to take one last swing, this time attempting to undermine Melania's intelligence. "Some critics have suggested that you were more of a figurehead during your time as First Lady, that the initiatives and speeches attributed to you were the work of your staff. How involved were you, really?" A subtle smile appeared on Melania's face, the kind of smile that suggested she had been expecting this question all along. "I was very involved," she said simply. "Every initiative, every event, every speech, it was my work, my vision. I had a wonderful team, but the ideas and the direction came from me. People can believe what they want, but I know the truth. And the truth is that I worked hard every day to make a difference." The audience erupted into applause, catching Cameron off guard. It was clear that Melania had won over at least a portion of those watching. Her calm, composed responses had outmatched the host's attempts to rattle her, and the momentum of the interview was shifting in her favor. As the segment ended, Cameron forced a smile and thanked Melania for her time, but the tension in their voice was unmistakable. Melania, meanwhile, remained poised, thanking Cameron and the audience before the cameras cut to another commercial break. In the control room, the producers exchanged glances. The interview wasn't going the way they had expected, but it was undeniably compelling television. Melania Trump had proven to be far more than a quiet, reserved public figure. She was a master of her own narrative, and the world was watching. As the interview entered its third segment, the atmosphere in the studio was electric. Viewers were glued to their screens, not for the dramatic takedown Cameron Hayes had envisioned, but for the graceful way Melania Trump continued to hold her ground. Cameron, however, wasn't ready to concede defeat. Determined to seize control of the narrative, they decided to change their approach, hoping a more personal angle might unsettle Melania. "Melania?" Cameron began, leaning forward with an air of feigned sincerity. "You've been in the public eye for a long time, and yet many people feel like they still don't really know you. You're often described as enigmatic. Why do you think that is? Do you prefer to keep people guessing?" Melania tilted her head slightly, a faint smile gracing her lips. "It is not about keeping people guessing," she replied, her voice measured and calm. "I am a private person, but I am also focused. I believe actions speak louder than words, and I have always tried to let my work and my values define me, not rumors or gossip." Cameron saw an opening and pressed on. "But don't you think that staying private has allowed the media to shape a narrative about you? Some would argue that silence can be interpreted as complicity." Melania's gaze didn't waver. "People will always have opinions," she said. "That is their right. My focus is not on changing minds. It is on doing what I believe is right. Silence is not complicity, it is often strength. I do not need to respond to every criticism to know who I am." The audience murmured in approval, and Cameron's frustration began to show. They shifted gears yet again, this time diving into Melania's Be Best initiative. "Your Be Best initiative aimed to address issues like cyberbullying and children's well-being," Cameron said. "But many critics found it ironic, given your husband's reputation on social media. Did you ever feel that his behavior undermined your message?" For the first time, Melania's expression hardened ever so slightly. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice unwavering. "Be Best was never about any one person," she said. "It was about children, about helping them navigate the challenges of the digital world. My husband's actions are his own, and I have always focused on what I can do to make a difference. The initiative was not about politics. It was about kindness, safety, and support." Cameron wasn't satisfied with the answer. "But surely you can see how some people might view it as hypocritical," they pressed. Melania's tone grew firmer, though still composed. "I cannot control how people choose to see things," she said. "What I can control is my work, my message, and my dedication to helping others. I will not let criticism stop me from doing what I believe is right." The tension in the room was palpable. Cameron had hoped to corner Melania, but instead, they found themselves at a standstill. Melania's unflappable demeanor was becoming a masterclass in handling confrontation, and the audience was increasingly on her side. Realizing that direct attacks weren't working, Cameron decided to try a different tactic, one that was more emotional. They brought up Melania's early years in Slovenia, her journey to the United States, and the challenges she faced along the way. "You've often spoken about your upbringing and the values your parents instilled in you," Cameron said. "How did those experiences shape the person you are today?" Melania's eyes softened as she considered the question. For a moment, it seemed as though she was transported back to her childhood. "My parents taught me the value of hard work and perseverance," she said. "We did not have much, but we had love, respect, and a strong sense of community. Those lessons stayed with me as I built my life in a new country. They taught me to be independent, to stay true to myself, and to never give up." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and for the first time, Cameron hesitated. The audience, too, was captivated by the glimpse into Melania's past. It was a reminder that behind the headlines and the public persona was a woman who had overcome significant challenges to reach where she was today. But Cameron wasn't ready to let the moment pass without attempting to regain control. They pivoted to Melania's life as a mother, asking how she balanced her role as a parent with the demands of being First Lady. "It was not always easy," Melania admitted, "but my son has always been my priority. I tried to shield him from the chaos as much as I could and give him a sense of normalcy." Being a mother is the most important role I have, and everything I do is with him in mind." The audience applauded, and for a brief moment, even Cameron seemed disarmed. It was clear that Melania's love for her son was genuine, and it added a layer of humanity to her public image that many had overlooked. As the segment drew to a close, Cameron attempted one final question, one that they hoped would be the turning point in their favor. "Melania, you've faced intense scrutiny and criticism throughout your time in the spotlight. Do you ever wonder if it was worth it? If the price of being in the public eye was too high?" Melania considered the question carefully before answering. "There have been difficult moments, yes," she said, "but I have also had the opportunity to make a difference, to help others, and to stand for what I believe in. That is what makes it worth it. I cannot let negativity define my life. I choose to focus on the positive, on the good I can do." The studio erupted in applause, and Cameron realized they had lost control of the narrative. What was supposed to be an exposé had turned into a showcase of Melania's resilience and strength. As the cameras cut to another commercial break, Cameron leaned back in their chair, visibly deflated. Melania, on the other hand, remained composed, her quiet confidence unshaken. The turning point had come and gone, and it was clear who had emerged victorious. As the final segment of the interview concluded, it was clear to everyone watching that Melania Trump had not only endured the grilling but emerged as a powerful and composed figure. Cameron Hayes, who had entered the studio with the intent to rattle and expose her, now found themselves in a vulnerable position, their own tactics laid bare. However, the true aftermath of this unforgettable interaction extended far beyond the confines of the studio. As the cameras stopped rolling, the studio erupted into applause. Not for the host, but for Melania. The studio audience, initially skeptical or indifferent, had been won over by her unwavering grace under pressure. Cameramen, producers, and even backstage crew members quietly whispered about how Melania had turned the narrative in her favor. Cameron, on the other hand, slumped back in their chair, realizing that the live audience had not reacted as expected. Their carefully laid plans to humiliate and undermine Melania had backfired spectacularly. Melania stood, her head held high, and smiled politely at Cameron. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. There was no sarcasm in her tone, only a genuine air of confidence. Cameron managed a weak nod, clearly unsure of how to respond. By the time Melania exited the studio, social media was already ablaze. Clips of her most powerful responses were trending across platforms. Hashtags like #MelaniaOwnsTheStage, #GraceUnderFire, and #BeBestInAction began dominating timelines. People from all walks of life, political supporters and critics alike, praised her poise, her eloquence, and her ability to navigate a confrontational interview without stooping to negativity. One particularly viral clip featured her response about choosing to focus on the positive. The simple but profound statement resonated with millions, sparking discussions about the importance of resilience and grace in the face of adversity. However, Cameron Hayes was not spared from scrutiny. Memes and critical tweets poured in, highlighting their condescending tone and attempts to corner Melania. Commentators labeled the host's approach as disrespectful and unprofessional, with many questioning whether they had been too focused on scoring political points rather than fostering meaningful dialogue. Backstage, Melania's team greeted her with smiles and quiet congratulations. Her publicist, Nicole, was particularly thrilled. "You were incredible," she said, scrolling through her phone. "The online response is overwhelmingly positive. You've completely shifted the narrative." Melania nodded. "I did not go there to fight," she said. "I only wanted to share my truth. If people understand that, I am grateful." Meanwhile, Cameron Hayes retreated to their dressing room, surrounded by their own team. The mood was somber, a stark contrast to the confident energy they displayed earlier. Cameron's producer sighed heavily. "That didn't go as planned," they muttered. Cameron frowned. "I thought she'd stumble. She's so reserved. I didn't expect her to hold her ground like that." "You underestimated her," the producer said bluntly. "And the audience noticed. We're getting backlash online for how aggressive you came across." Over the next few days, the fallout from the interview continued to dominate headlines. Major news outlets ran articles dissecting the encounter, with many praising Melania's composure. Even commentators who had been critical of her in the past acknowledged her ability to handle difficult questions with dignity. One op-ed in a leading newspaper read, "Whether you agree with her politics or not, there's no denying that Melania Trump demonstrated an impressive level of poise and resilience during her interview with Cameron Hayes. In a media landscape often dominated by outrage and conflict, her approach was a refreshing reminder of the power of grace under pressure." The Be Best initiative, which had struggled to gain traction during her time in the White House, experienced a surge in interest. Donations poured in from supporters inspired by her message, and organizations reached out to collaborate on projects aimed at promoting kindness and digital well-being. For Cameron Hayes, the aftermath was less favorable. Viewership for their show plummeted in the days following the interview, as audiences criticized their approach. Sponsors expressed concerns, and social media users called for the network to reconsider their hosting role. In a desperate attempt to salvage their reputation, Cameron issued a public apology. "I realized that my tone during the interview may have come across as overly confrontational," they said in a statement. "It was never my intention to disrespect Mrs. Trump, and I regret if my approach detracted from the important topics we discussed." However, the apology did little to stem the backlash. Viewers weren't quick to forget the perceived hostility, and many argued that the apology was too little, too late. For Melania, the experience marked a turning point. She had always been cautious about engaging with the media, wary of the potential for misrepresentation. But the overwhelming support she received after the interview gave her a renewed sense of purpose. In the weeks that followed, she continued to promote the Be Best initiative, appearing at events and giving interviews to outlets that were more interested in meaningful conversations than sensationalism. She also began working on a memoir, determined to share her story in her own words. As the story of the interview continued to unfold, Melania took to her social media platforms to thank her supporters. In a video message, she said, "I want to thank everyone who has reached out with kind words after my recent interview. Your support means the world to me. It reminds me of the importance of standing firm in your beliefs and staying true to yourself, no matter the challenges you face." She paused, her smile soft but sincere. "I also encourage all of you to think about the impact you can have in your own lives. Whether it's through kindness, hard work, or standing up for what you believe in, each of us has the power to make a difference. Let's focus on building each other up and creating a better future for all." As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories and powerful moments. If the story resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for being part of our community, and stay tuned for more incredible stories.